Well, the primary outcome really was they established the relationship. That was far and away the most important. So number one is they established a relationship. Number two, they established a relationship. Number three, I think that President Trump is going to visit China in the near future is important. What that will do is it will set a time frame during which the bureaucracies of China and the United States need to resolve issues. So there's nothing, in my experience, there's nothing that focuses the bureaucracy more than knowing that the leader is going to come. So if we set November 1st as the deadline, that means the Department of Commerce, the U.S. Treasury, the State Department, will move forward to resolve issues so when the president comes, he can announce those issues, announce the resolution of this issue, progress on those issues. So that is terribly important. And it's also important that early in the presidency, we establish the pattern of the leaders meeting. It would concern me if a long period of time evolved without the President Trump and President Xi meeting. Now they obviously met once already. I expect they'll meet on the sidelines of the G20. If Trump goes to China this year, obviously he's going to meet with President Xi for a long time during that. So we have 3 meetings in the first year of the Trump presidency. That's okay. It's necessary in that the leaders need to set the tone for the relationship. They need to make progress on North Korea, on the East China Sea, on trade, on investment. They need to do that, but that is not sufficient. What is going to define the U.S.-China relationship in the long term is the people-to-people relationship. And I mean people-to-people in the broadest sense. There are now 325,000 Chinese students that are studying in the United States. There are 25,000 Americans that are studying in China. Those people, not this year or next year, but 25, 50 years from now, they're going to determine the future of the relationship, and they're going to lead the governments in what the relationship is. Investment. We're going to come out with a report in a couple of weeks that Chinese investment in the United States reached $46 billion in 2016. That means a lot of Chinese are working with Americans in America. It's always been that Americans work with Chinese in China, but now it's the reverse flow. And those kinds of relationships build U.S.-China relations. I remember when I first went to China, I represented U.S. investors in China, 1979, 80, 81. The relationships that I built with the Chinese I work with affected the way they thought about America and about U.S.-China relations, and the relationships I built with them affected the way I thought about China and U.S.-China relations. And I think one of the reasons why I'm such a supporter of constructive U.S.-China relations is because of that experience very early in my career. My experience in the State Department was relevant, but my experience going and living in China, working with investors, really formed how I thought about China. So this $46 billion that came last year, and now 141,000 Americans are on Chinese payrolls in the United States. So that means, so if you figure about 4, 5 people per family, you're getting close to almost 1 million Americans who will think about China in a different way from Americans who have no relationship. They're working with Chinese-owned companies, they're getting paychecks from Chinese-owned companies. It will change the perception. So I think presidential meetings are important, but the people-to-people relationship ultimately defines what the presidents will do. Well, I think they have started with the first step of what my recommendations would be, which is meet. I think they should meet early and often. They have met early, now they need to meet often. If they meet on the sidelines of the G20 and President Trump goes to China in 2017, that would be productive. They need to establish trust. That a lot of what goes on in China and what goes on in the United States is there's such a lack of trust that everything is interpreted in the most negative way possible. So the motivations are always challenged. If somebody does the right thing, they say, oh no, the motivation must have been wrong. I mean, if you think about AIIB, the United States, I always think back to Bob Zellick, Robert Zellick, who was Deputy Secretary of State in 2005 and came to the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations and gave a speech at our annual dinner about China becoming a responsible stakeholder. Responsible stakeholder. AIIB is, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, is precisely that. It's China behaving as a responsible stakeholder. It's exactly what China should do. And the United States doesn't support it. I kind of went, what? That's such mistrust. It's mistrust of the motivation. So it's important that the presidents set a atmosphere of trust. I think President Trump telling President Xi in person that we had launched the missiles towards Syria was positive. In other words, he didn't go back to the hotel and suddenly see it on television. He was told, which I think was good, and that kind of would strengthen the relationship. President Xi and President Trump established a relationship, and that's important. A lot of people view it kind of important for the U.S.-China relationship. That is correct, but it's not totally what the situation is. In the next 4 years, a crisis in the world will arise, whether it was what we just saw in Syria, whether it's humanitarian assistance, whether it's a pandemic. It is important that when that crisis arises, that President Xi and President Trump have a relationship which can be the foundation for the discussion which will help resolve the issue.